Thank you, and it's an honor to be here. And I actually, again, must confess that after sitting through a whole morning of people doing extraordinary things with their lives and sharing those inspiring experiences, I feel like a bit of an imposter because I have virtually nothing inspiring to tell you. I'm going to actually share some thoughts on the subject of language. And what interests me, a presentation called Language Games, which really is about the games that we play with language and the games in some ways that language in turn plays back with us to try and understand that a bit. Actually, this comes from a larger interest that over the years one has developed in looking at trivial aspects of everyday life. Particularly when we talk about India, I have always found that somehow India has this ability to attract, it's a magnet for lofty descriptions. You cannot talk about India without describing it in cosmological terms. It's a grand paradox. You don't come to India to find India, but to find yourself, and all that stuff. So India attracts. It's a sort of magnet for magnificent adjectives, and somehow in understanding India and understanding what is happening, at least to me, always was through the experience of the small everydayness of India. Stuff that we did without thinking about it. Stuff that happened around us. How we swore and how we belched in public and what we saw and the films that we sort of, went for first day, first show off, etc. The whole experience of being Indian, which somehow did not seem to be captured by all that loftiness. And therefore, how do you decode the world around us by interrogating what is implicit, obvious, what is reflexive? How do we reveal how we shape meaning and in turn get shaped by it? How does this entire process actually take place? Today, I am actually restricting my talk to one particular such text. You can read any number of texts about India. You can read popular culture. You can read our customs. You can read a whole lot of different texts out of which you can make sense of India. I am focusing today on language. It's an embedded text. Language is what we communicate through. And so very often, we are unconscious because it seems to us that language is objective. There is a reality out there, and there is language that describes that reality. There is a one-to-one correspondence between reality and the words that we use to describe reality with. And I'll try and show how perhaps that appearance of naturalness about language, that it appears natural, may not in fact be quite so innocent. That we in some ways construct our world with language. And I'm going to use some everyday examples to try and make that point. Examples of how we shape what we see and how we are in turn shaped by language. These are again everyday, silly, sometimes trivial examples, but spanning the area of politics, culture, economy, society. How we are employing different language strategies, both deliberately and otherwise. And in some ways, how some dominant discourses of our time get furthered through these strategies. So let me start by the world of business, beginning with a particular phrase usage that is very common nowadays. I find this a very fascinating phrase, stimulus package. The fact that here you had an economic world financial system that collapsed. And it collapsed because people who were supposed to be experts in it screwed up. And now, therefore, we are bailing them out. And what do we call that bailout? We call it a stimulus package. Implicit in the idea of stimulus is the idea of growth, that you are doing this with purpose. It is implicit in this thought. There is neatness, there is order, there is purpose. You put together a package, and it is towards a specific end, which is to stimulate. In some ways, if you then look at the underlying level of meaning, it almost has the Viagra-like virility about it. The idea that, the economy has a package which you sort of stimulate, you sort of boost it so that it pumps funds, through the economic system. And if you look at the kind of language that surrounds the whole idea of the stimulus package, you see a certain intent revealing itself, as against when you have a word like subsidy, something subsiding in a sense, or which was described in a lot of editorials as leakages. So here you have, on the one hand of the spectrum, something that boosts you, and on the other hand, you have something that drips wetly. There's a leakage a loss of vital body fluids, in some senses, is taking place. Implicitly, therefore, when that money, the same bailout, is employed for corporations, people who are supposedly experts, it gets cast in terms of a certain kind, and when it is used to try and rescue, as in the case of India, through loan waivers, destitute farmers, it gets cast as leakages. Interesting implicit language strategies that make us, in a sense, not question the intent that is underlying. Another phrase that was used, I don't know how many of you are part of the sort of the corporate world and how familiar you were with this phrase, but there was a few months where you could not escape this phrase. Green shoots. Everybody was on their knees hunting for green shoots. Are there green shoots emerging? Are there? And green shoots were early signs of recovery that were being looked by all the sort of corporate commentators, financial commentators. And in a sense, what is green shoots? Again, very interesting language strategy, because what you are saying is that A, you're looking for shoots, so any small sign is legitimate. And because shoots eventually grow into something larger, implicitly any small sign is a sign of future growth, which is not only inevitable, but also irreversible. So in some senses, you have almost posited optimism. You have hardwired into the idea of green shoots inevitable positivity about economic recovery. And of course, it has a second level of meaning. Green shoots have a waif-like vulnerability. Poor, innocent, harmless green shoots. Don't go trampling on them on your heavy boots of reason. Say, ask questions of it and say, is it really a sign of real recovery? Again, it's a seemingly innocent language strategy that serves another intent. I'll switch to a dramatically different kind of an example. This is actually a language strategy which has always intrigued me. It relates to a traditional custom. Ai-Jee, Sunte Ho, Mohan ke papa, some curious reason, the Indian wife, being sort of not allowed to address her husband by name. This is strange. Why should that be the case? I mean, it really is a baffling kind of a strategy if you think about it as a strategy on the face of it. And lest, because the young cosmopolitan audience, lest you think that, this is something that happened many generations ago and doesn't happen now. Remember, in no ad that I remember at least, today does a husband address a wife by name. Even on premium brands like a Saffola or something, unki tabiyat, unki health, they will use the unka phrase, they will not use the name. So it's not only about yesterday. One could argue that in some ways it is part of a larger network of strategies that worked to keep intimacy within marriage at bay. The fact of the matter is that the husband and wife, in fact, if you go back in time, you will find that in a traditional joint family, if a husband is sitting somewhere, the wife will not sit next to the husband. In fact, if that happens, the wife used to sort of move away. You will find it through a variety of methods. In fact, in a Hindi film, typically, the way the daughter-in-law came in was almost like an acquisition for the mother-in-law. Ke beta bahu le aana, is how the sort of, pro forma was filled in a sense. The demand was made. And the husband was almost the incidental consummating device. So that, you could sort of... But there was a logic for it in some senses. Again, as many others have also argued, there was a great anxiety about the young wife, full of sexual sort of electricity, who would draw the husband away from the folds of the joint family. And therefore, how do you keep, the sort of the family structure intact? But if you think about this as a strategy, don't use your husband's name. It tells you that keep the marriage role-based. Do not make it a relationship, intimate relationship between individuals. In that sense, if you think of it under those circumstances, it is a fairly deep kind of a strategy. The other different a different kind of construction. How people have traditionally used the word love in English in Hindi films. It's interesting that when you say I love you, somehow when somebody says that in a Hindi film, it is with the quotation marks intact. कि मैंने उसे I love you कह दिया. It is, it's like when I was growing up saying कि मेरा happy birthday आ रहा है. It's the idea is alien, so you are unable to separate the thought from the context. To you, I love you is the word, and the fact that the love is a concept in it, and therefore it's almost like an enactment. That English love was almost an emulsion that we sort of painted onto the exterior of ourselves. It was not natural. It was something that people wearing trousers did with each other, or frocks. It had that sense of almost being a foreign confection, one of those foreign desserts which you don't know whether to eat or use as a decoration in your drawing room. That kind of a feel that it had. Self-conscious, and therefore you had songs like Angrezi mein kehte hain ki I love you, which is actually teaching somebody, or a particularly odious song called Ilu Ilu, or some, Ilu ka matlab I love you. So again, these are explications, if you like, of this concept. On a different note, this is perhaps a fairly subtle kind of a language strategy that is used, which is when you use desensitizing aggregations. The idea of a slum. When you use a single 4-letter word called slum, what you are actually doing is collapsing into it multiple human realities. So you're doing two kinds of things. You're collapsing the multiple into single, and you're taking human realities, human stories, human anxieties and ambitions and aspirations, and converting it into a structure. What that allows you is to, then you can talk about the slum being an eyesore. You can talk about the slum being relocated, demolished. It would be very difficult for you to do so if you had to account for all those people within that structure. So you sort of, in a sense, impersonalize it by shriveling it into a collective idea. This is a common human strategy. We do it, all the time. In the hospital, you refer to patient. Patient ko de do. Patient number 12. Bed number 13. Because we find it difficult to cope with so many diverse simultaneous reality, and therefore we need to shrivel them into a single structure. The other desensitizing language strategy is to empty out meaning by overuse. When you say, I'm hungry for success, or I'm starving, in everyday language, in some senses, over a period of time, the meaning of those words as to what it means to really starve and what it means to be really hungry, over a period of time, there is a degree of desensitization that takes place in an idea like that. This is the other language strategy of nowadays that you find a lot of being employed. The empty apology. The empty apology is to use words while draining them of apparent meaning. The apology of today, instead of saying I'm sorry for what I did, is that if I have caused you offense, then I'm sorry. If you have misconstrued what I have said, then in which case I am sorry. So a Ricky Ponting or a Damien Martin, when they pushed Sharad Pawar from the stage, in one of the cricket matches, this is the common structure of an apology, and in which if you think about it, what that apology is saying is that I'm sorry, but you are an idiot for not understanding me. In effect, you are actually transferring the responsibility onto the other person by saying that, you didn't get what I said, I didn't mean any harm, but since you clearly have not understood, sorry. This is, I think in some ways reveals some paradoxical Indian kind of a view, which is how you are able to take two parts of a word, the phrase, which are actually opposites, and sort of tie them together and make sense of them. The stay order. It marries, it actually institutionalizes stasis. It says, I have firmly decided to do nothing. It is in a sense a very purposeful inaction that you are saying that I am very clear, we will do nothing. Circumstances will remain exactly as they are. And status quoism, therefore, is promoted as authoritative, clarity providing kind of an order. And it's interesting that we are able to live with this. Stay order for years. And it's interesting that the stay then gets vacated. I mean, that's, again, it's an interesting sort of a language strategy. The Indian ability to create new categories through language, new orders. For instance, senior players in a cricket team, when they are dropped, they are not dropped, they are rested. Which is interesting. Resting is a voluntary idea. How can I be rested? I can either rest or I can be dropped. But surely you cannot sort of put me to bed and tie me down and sort of say that, I have been rested. But what it does, through that cunning use of an intermediate category, it sort of gives their ego, saying that, no, you have not been dropped. Of course you have not been dropped. You've merely been rested. I mean, it allows for some sort of a face saving to take place. It's an intermediate category. Or the fact that matric fail, chauthi pass are sort of qualifications. So again, you create your own intermediate categories, again, just through how you use language. Of course, its uses are of other kinds too. Its most potent use in some senses comes in politics, how we use language. When a Narendra Modi rails against Delhi Sultanate, what he is doing is something very, very potent. Because on the face of it, he is describing the central government in terms you cannot argue with. The government, central government is called New Delhi routinely, and Sultanate is a loose translation of government. But by using those particular phrases, he is dredging up cultural memory. He is creating a historical and a religious axis on which he is placing the government, and he is defining himself implicitly as a victim. Again, by the device of dredging up that historical and cultural memory. It's a very, very powerful strategy that is used, and the larger strategy is that if you own your enemy, invent a name for them. Then you will be able to respond to the enemy in a way that is advantageous for you. The same thing was used when Advani coined the idea of pseudo-secularism, which is exactly the same strategy. Secularism is an impossible idea to argue with. It's like democracy. So how do you can't say I'm not a secularist, but you can say I'm not a pseudo-secularist. It's a fabulous language strategy, again, if seen from that worldview. And this is a common thing. Advertising, of course, follows it all the time. It'll give names, for diseases. There is a whole hierarchy of disrepair that advertising invents with your body. 15 things that can go wrong with your hair and your skin. That's what advertising does. Even in politics, you'll be a whole lot of other examples. Like, for instance, there is a channel that uses coined the word splitists. I don't know how many of you have seen, but to refer to Maoists and Kashmir, all of it together, now they've used a new word. So again, that's an interesting strategy. And finally, what I think is probably, in some ways, the most common use or language strategy to appropriate a certain part of India and to arrogate to it all the legitimacy of the civilization that is India. It's an invented, think of it, brand India is actually seems to represent India. But brand India is actually the concern of a very small group of people. If you want to build India, you have to deal with the questions that we dealt with all of today. If you want to build brand India, apparently you have to build good roads, build new international airports, and hold Commonwealth Games without screwing up. If you do all of this, you build brand India. You don't have to worry about the other stuff. Because brand India is to show off. It is to display to the outside world. It doesn't really matter. You don't have to fix anything internally. You get away, and yet you have the wonderful legitimacy of apparently speaking for India. Through adding that one word brand, by attaching it in front of India, you have, without seemingly having moved at all, it's a real estate land grab. It's a conceptual land grab where you have appropriated that for yourself. you sort of shrivel a civilization to the product. And if you think about it, this is owned by a constituency of which has a similar linguistic strategy. Middle class. As sociologist Satish Deshpande has pointed out, if you think of the middle class, actually it is by no means middle. You look at, it's not the mean, it's not the median, it's not the mode in terms of income distribution. The middle class is an invention. that gives the feeling, what the middleness does, it gives it the legitimacy of representativeness. Because I speak for the middle, I am somehow representative. But actually the middle class in India, almost all of it, is part decidedly of the upper class. So this is a similar device that has been used to arrogate for itself certain privileges. So the overall point I was trying to make through a variety of examples was the fact that language is not innocent and reveals much more than what it apparently does. And it is possible without too much trouble, in a sense, to ask and read a little more into it. The words we use tell us so much about ourselves and the world in which we live, and it's possible to sort of look at that. And therefore, perhaps language needs not only to be read, but also to be reread for us to be clear in some ways about what the other intentions or the other levels of meaning are. Thank you.
India is poised to become a leadership economy pretty soon, but that's bringing along with it a lot of problems. You have inequality, you have poverty, you have accidents, you have diseases. You know, talking of disease, did you realize TB in India actually kills 2 people per minute? Now let's just step back and try and understand what is one of the biggest causes of TB. It's just rampant spitting everywhere. You've seen it all over the place. And more than anything else, if you look at India specifically, culture of being clean, but only in my private space. In public space, I couldn't care less. You know, even slum dwellers for that matter end up taking a bath every day. They end up cleaning their homes. And then what do? They take all the garbage and then go out to the other side of the road and drop it off there. And not just slum dwellers. You know, I've heard of people who stop their cars at Mahim Causeway so that they can just drop off litter. Now, people have got so used to doing this that it really doesn't matter anymore, you know. More than anything else, if you look at weakening infrastructure, which is another big problem. For a train service that actually runs more than 2,000 trains a day, even those people find it very, very difficult to keep people like us off the tracks. Now, the conventional way of solving all of this has been generate awareness of the problem, educate me about the problem, and then I'll listen to you. But people do that, you know, they generate awareness, they educate people about the problem, and yet what happens? We continue to do what we do. Not just in social problems, even when you're looking at life and death situations, people find it really, really hard to change their behavior. Now, how many of us in this room don't know that smoking is bad and it could kill us? Yet, we